Okay, good evening, everyone. So welcome you all to the November 2020, sorry, did I say November, September 2024 edition of the Nigerian chapter of the System Dynamics Society. And then presenting today is a doctoral candidate at Glasgow, Caledonia University, Kehinde Oyolowo Akingbehin. Sure I did not butcher that. And then I'll allow him to go ahead with his presentation on systematically optimizing blended finance for sustainable energy development in Nigeria, integrating local dimensions to enhance clean energy investment. So I'll allow you to please introduce yourself and go ahead with your presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelechi. Oh, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Akingbehin Oyolowo Akingbehin. As the moderator said, I'm a doctoral candidate with Glasgow Cardinal University in London. I actually did my master's there before proceeding to do this PhD. I've started in 2021, 22. That was just the height of COVID, and I'm still here today. We're trying to put an end to this. The title of the research is the project is Systematically Optimizing Blended Finance for Sustainable Energy Development in Nigeria, integrating local dimensions to enhance clean energy investment. Professor Kehinde titles along is my main director of studies and also the main supervisor, while Dr. Posi Olatibosun is my second supervisor. Thank you. The overview of this presentation is just as we've seen on the screen now. I'm going to introduce the research and the background behind it, talk about my problem statements, aims, and objectives. Then I will talk about the overview of major gaps within the literature, then discuss my methodology and strategy, which is one of the key things I need insights from this meeting. And as we have practitioners in system thinking, system dynamics in the house. So my findings and discussions is just from the work in progress really. It's just from the systemic review I did on this topic from my journals and also the great literature. So, and again, there will be challenges and ethics that I'll be discussing in the last part of the frame. In terms of introduction, from what we have in the global energy system in the world now, fossil fuels, again, the contribution of fossil fuels is almost 90%. That was at 2019. And again, when we look at what we are again in the world, we are in transition. So obviously, in transition, the global energy system, this system is consuming too much fossils, and obviously it's not sustainable for the world and also for the environment. So this is the introduction, and obviously that actually led us to what we call the climate change crisis, which is the climate change crisis, and this is mostly talking about carbon dioxide emissions growing year by year. When we look at the trend from the graph that's on the right here, the trend is actually showing the upward trajectory. That's not going to be good for the environment. Again, this is alarming, and obviously there's been so many policies in place that's trying to bring this down. For now, the emissions of carbon dioxide is still going high, and it's not only carbon dioxide. Also, when we look at other greenhouse gases, also I think it's almost the same. Methane is also following the same trend. So this is actually not sustainable for this world that we live in. And when we look at the global impact of all this climate change, and again, there's irreversible global warming and climate change happening all over the world. So we are seeing this in terms of droughts, floods. Again, this we believe is a tragedy on the horizon. Drought is a big issue in most parts of the world. Cyclones, most recently in Brazil. So these are all the impacts of global warming that we're talking about. But when we look at the impacts or the impact of global climate change really all over the world, we actually believe sub-Saharan Africa will suffer more. They will experience intense. And again, when we look at this graph here, again, it has to do with literature saying that sub-Saharan Africa will actually experience extreme risk more than any part of the world. And that diagram is showing there because we can see extreme risk in terms of the color red there on the frame, which is compared to low risk in some parts of the world. And these are also the high countries that are actually emitting more. So it's a bit of injustice, really, but my research is not going to climate injustice. Again, when we look at analysis of socio-economic factors, especially risk to sustainability, this region will suffer more. And that was from the World Bank in 2020. When it comes to this, in terms of transition and trying to get out of this unsustainable way of producing energy for the world, capital has actually been said that to be a very important factor, although it's not alone on its own sufficient, but it is a key variable in terms of achieving sustainable energy development. Again, the problem of sustainable energy development has to do with the fact that most countries want to develop economically. Obviously, you have to be sustainable. So finance is actually a key part, especially for those countries that I've mentioned before, most likely in low development countries and most especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. So what do we have? What do we have in terms of the financial gap? What is the extent of it? And that's the estimate that we have on the screen now. When we look at the Global South, we need almost 474 billion by year 2030 to be able to actually fill this financial gap that will actually help in adaptation and mitigation. Again, additionally, another 30 billion will also be needed every year. In terms of US dollars, 250 billion will be needed even by 2030. That is from another researcher. So these figures looks almost very similar. They are not the same, but again, it helps us to the extent that this amount we're looking for is not in millions, it's just billions, and this is massive, this is huge. And obviously, countries of this global south or developing economies may not be able to actually generate this. And again, when we remember the 2030 Accord, which simply means the countries of the North trying to contribute towards mitigation in Sub-Saharan Africa or developing economies, then how would this finance actually get in? Based on what we've said, again, that huge financial gap cannot only be provided by public actors, or most especially from developing economies. So it also means that private finance also can also be strategically deployed. And again, it's also because the public finance is not going to be sufficient, according to Weinberg. Again, also there's a shortage of private capital globally. However, we have some institutional investors that actually have so much under their management, and these are actors that we believe should be able to spend or contribute towards financing so clean energy projects in Sub-Saharan Africa. But obviously, how are they not doing that? Why are they not doing it? So these are the questions that we are asking. Again, in terms of the graph for the financial gap, as I've discussed before, this is the required public investment that we need. Between 116 to 139 billion. Again, required private investment in terms of debt or even our equity, it's also around 20, 30, 40% or 7% for equity. So again, this each amount is needed. So which simply means we need a ratio of at least 1 to 5 in terms of private investment that will be needed to public investment in financing climate change globally, most especially in Africa. Now, when it comes to finance, apart from the fact that we know that Sub-Saharan Africa is on the equator and it's going to feel the impact of climate change more, it also has some peculiar risk when it comes to finance. In terms of sovereign rating for most of this country, is either poor or even just average. It's not at the level it should be. The sovereign rating is actually telling us how rich a country is in terms of being able to finance projects on their own. Most of the countries in this part of the world are actually on the CD, according to the Standard & Poor's foreign rating. This is dated though, but the latest one is still looking at the same thing. Even again, looking at the impact of COVID after this graph is actually getting worse now. So obviously, these countries on their own may not be buoyant enough to be able to fund climate finance in their respective domains. So therefore, it's important then to start thinking of new investment approaches in terms of new ways of thinking. In the olden days, funding is what we talk about when it comes to ODAs or overseas development assistance coming to other countries. Or most likely, recently, investments have changed. We're not talking about financing. And financing simply means those countries also taking part, the local investors in those economies also taking part. It most likely also attracting institutional investors. So therefore, we are looking for a financial structure that actually has risk management structures in place and being able to also monitor and impact future. It's a difficult thing because most of private finance actors They want returns. And obviously, when we are funding climate change or you're funding the clean energy projects, most of these are most sustainable projects are not going to have the same returns as we have in normal projects in the world. So we want to look at impact. So we need a finance approach that will actually meet the needs of all the actors. Again, this frontier has to be between risk, return, and also the impact. It's a difficult thing. We know return is always the key for investors, but when it comes to risk and impact, especially when it comes to sustainable projects, this is where we need an innovative mechanism that can actually balance that for us. And that is exactly where a blending finance comes in. A blending finance is actually a structuring approach that actually takes capital from guarantee and other places. But in using it based on the problems we've discussed before, the interventions from using blending finance is exactly what we have on the board. When we look at it there, when we look at the supply and in terms of interest rate and supply of financing, obviously interest rate has a direct impact. And inverse relationship with financial projects. So obviously, when interest rate is high, the supply of finance will be low. So in this example, what we are simply saying there is that for us to be able to make that work and come up with market interventions, then a blend finance structure is one structure that will actually shift the supply curve downwards. If I can annotate that on the board, this is the original supply curve here, which is SOS one. So again, by bringing in blend finance, it actually shifts that curve downwards towards here. And that simply means the interest rate will actually be reduced. However, the supply will also become higher. So that's actually a very important role of blending finance in this kind of transactions. And that's why we actually believe it's a very good approach, especially for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But again, what does this approach entails? This is what it entails. But when we look at the external return and external risk, blend finance will actually enhance the return enhancement. That's what it's supposed to do. Again, the project here before blending is at this point on the curve. And what blending finance will just do, because it's going to come with some de-risking aspect to it, and therefore the risk return aspect will move from C to B just because of the use of blending. And therefore, what does blended finance actually entails? In literature, we have different definitions. Although there is no acceptable definition for it, definitions come from different public actors that take part in blending. But this is the 2 or 3 I've been able to choose from the internet. According to OECD's strategic use of development finance for mobilizing additional finance towards sustainable energy goals in developing countries. It's also characterized by leverage, impact, and returns. Again, OECD and World Bank definition. Melfax believe is likely to crowd in private sector, which is an aspect that we're looking at. And most especially is capable of mobilizing the broad-based institutional investment that we have in the world, especially from pension funds that are not being used to finance projects all over the world. Again, blending generally simply means we want aid, philanthropy from NGOs, impact on social investors, commercial investors coming together, the structure that with public actors, DFIs, World Bank, and so on, in terms of funding institutions or just social enterprise. Again, it's acceptable because, again, it meets all the objective of all these different aid agencies. A typical structure of blending finance is like that. This is the blending intermediary. So these are the investors there. There's going to be a regulatory environment. So the instrument of mitigation will be there, and there will be projects that we cannot be able to enable the project to be actually completed. That's just the way. This is why it works. When we have a DFI or an aid agency coming in, or general agency or ministry equivalents, with bilateral organizations and MDBs, they can actually fund projects directly to project companies and also to the end beneficiaries through that means there. Again, if there's a development bank in place in any country, we have 1 or 2 now, even in Nigeria. This is their role they're going to play. The donor government will actually take the money through the multinational development banks, and that goes through the company and also the end beneficiary. So it's like a way of bringing in so many actors in terms of being able to fund projects. Because, however, if there is no DFI that will be there, there's going to be the government directly funding projects, especially clean projects in Africa. And we know the scarcity in terms of government funds all over the world now, most especially in Nigeria, from what Nigeria is going through. So we actually need agencies that can come in for impact purposes so that private finance actors can actually take part in the project. So in literature, when we look at contemporary literature in terms of blended finance and in terms of the way it was structured, we have to understand that it doesn't follow, it's not going to be a material improvement to focus on, you have to be skills. So he has so many issues on his own though. It's as I said, it's not a given that you just have to happen like that. But again, he has to work in terms with other ways of generating finance. When we look at the concept of finance worldwide, we know it follows the Keynesian method. Again, when you look at sustainable finance, though, it's actually totally against that, because again, sustainable finance is not your usual triple bottom line ways of making money from business. So in that case, this kind of research has an ontology that is mostly going to be critical realistic in its perspective. That's what Lagod was saying there. Pat and so on said also their own. There's so much that we also need to know in terms of this structural approach according to Anderson. There's no common framework also according to Etheridge and Co. Again, it gives an opportunity for collaboration between actors. These are the things. These are what the common contemporary literature has said in terms of blended finance. And general remarks from me. This is actually from my systemic review. Therefore, from all these issues, because we've looked at, they believe that blended finance has potential. But despite the potential, though, these are the gaps in literature that I've seen. The first one is the local dimension is actually a big issue for blended finance, and that actually dictates the title of my project. The local dimension is the most significant challenge for blended finance actors. Local dimension in that simply means the local domain not taking part. Most of the time, the project is top down. That means it comes from the DFI straight to the countries rather than bottom up. So obviously, the local aspect is connected. So that's a big issue. Again, most companies or most DFIs, MDBs, they don't understand local context in a systemic analytic manner, according to Bela. Most especially, most governments are also not familiar with blended finance. And again, as I said in terms of ontology before, the research philosophy, climate change research actually states the need of complex thinking and collaboration across sectors. Climate change finance is not going to be just one way route. It needs collaboration. And that's exactly the reason why a kind of project like this is suited for this time. Again, in terms of what the local context actually means for blended finance, these are the principles of what blended finance should deliver at the local level. It should be anchored on the development rationale. Again, the design should actually mean mobilization of commercial finance. You have to tailor to the local context. These are principles that have been laid down by OECD and Co. in terms of local the context or dimensions to blend finance. Obviously, we are not achieving this a lot in Africa. So again, it's part of what dictates the project. So therefore, in terms of my objectives for the research project, the first one is to reconcile or just systematically realign system thinking, using system dimensions to actually look at blended finance, see how we can connect it to the local level. We want to identify the barriers that will be limiting blended finance from actually being used at scale and speed in Africa, most especially Nigeria as a case study. I want to propose the adoption of system thinking model as a methodological paradigm, and obviously develop the SD and ST and SD paradigm as a tool for understanding the so much complex dynamics that have to do with this big system. And almost likely recommend possible policy interventions to scale up clean energy investment in Africa, most especially Nigeria. In terms of the philosophy, as I said, the underlying assumption of sustainable finance actually rests upon the political realism. And again, the events, the real are there. From here, we can see that the events are what we actually observe or experience. The after events are not events that are generated by the real. So from this philosophy, it actually tends that my research is tending towards the system thinking philosophy, which is also like what we have in our system thinking. in the sense that the philosophy talks about events, talks about patterns and structures. So in terms of what's happening, the event is what we see on the horizon. We see that there's a disconnection between the local actors and donors in sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria. We know that we need an innovative system of approach to actually be able to sustain finance. But obviously, that's what we see on the periphery. What about those things that we cannot see on the bottom, which are aiding the way? Again, which is exactly what system thinking is all about. We only talk about things we can see. What about the aiding or critical factors that actually not make things work? So again, here for this project, what about the trends and the disconnection between donors and actors? We don't know that. What are the changes that have occurred in terms of the pattern? In terms of structure, what has influenced the pattern? So what are the changes that exist between the actors? We don't have an idea of that. And most especially, what drives those behaviors? This is more of like a system thinking, system dynamic approach. So it now dictates why I've actually gone ahead at using system thinking, system dynamics as mathematical choice. So in terms of doing that, I'm following the exploratory sequential mixed method approach, where I first of all collect qualitative data, analyze it, then go to quantitative data. The first aspect of this project has been systemic review of data in terms of from all these government agencies, NGOs, from public actors, and most especially also from the literature. So that part has been done. That part dictates me coming up with a conceptual coastal loop diagram for issues, discussions that I've had from literature. And that will now take me to collecting data to validate that, which is this later stage of this project. When it comes to data analysis, from what I've collected from literature, I already use Evensim to actually build my causal loop diagrams. So Evensim is a specialized software. I'm very sure we're all familiar with that. Again, that's what I've used so far. The environment methodology, as I said again, is why does it say that I've actually touched on that before in terms of using system thinking, system dynamics. Again, apart from what I've said before, there's complex thinking and collaboration that is important. The domain is actually complicated in nature. There's so many actors. Again, non-linear, there's so many feedback loops, and there's no two-way interconnection and relationships are there. These are the things that actually make me, actually justify my use of system thinking, system dynamics as methodology. The justification is what I have on the board. Now, generally, we all know what the system methodology is. This is actually one of the thoughts I had actually Niger and Neruja. So the system thinking is actually having an understanding of a system in terms of collecting data. We identify the problem and the definition. We have what we call a system conceptualization. We all know that causal loop diagrams. We do a simulation after data collection and try to actually come up with policy analysis and improvement before we talk about policy decision. So this is a general understanding. In terms of my initial findings, which is what I call discussion one, these are the initial findings from the internet, from literature. Again, systemic review actually revealed a lot. This is Nigeria as a case study now. Population up to that is the most populated in Africa. We know that growth rate is almost 2%. The country is projected to be at around 400 million people by 2050, if not more. The summary of the energy different factors. There's so much happening in Nigerian energy system. 10% of the GDP is invested in 2020. Final consumption is going geometrically every 5 years. Summary of the environmental factors. Although Nigeria is not the total consumption of emitter of carbon dioxide, but again, it actually is low, but the figure has been rising steadily. Again, that's exactly what the last point. Carbon emissions have been rising steadily since 2010. Well, the most important part is that although it may not actually be a net emitter of emissions, but obviously that country will actually suffer more from the impact of climate change. So some of the initial findings I've done here, this is actually coming from a coastal loop diagram that I did with my supervisor, which is a very straightforward one. This is actually a relationship between some variables that we all know. We're looking at energy demand there, renewables, non-renewables, clean environment, technology, available capital, actually impact on all those points. This is actually from Malani et al. 28 and 2008. So all I've just done is I have just introduced included in my own part based on my literature review. This aspect of it, this aspect is my own aspect. The other aspect that is coming from literature. So that is my aspect. I'm therefore saying to be able to achieve climate change, cleaner environment, and capital available capital, effective and innovative bottom-up blended finance investments can actually meet that need, which is exactly what this loop is trying to explain there. Again, although to achieve that also, there'll be so many barriers, there'll be so much in terms of the scope that we need for me to look at the demand and supply of blended finance being a complex thing. But this is just the initial diagram of causal loop I was able to draw from my work in progress. Again, I also did this. This is in terms of when we look at all the actors that are actually in that domain or in that system of blended finance. There's so many actors. Project developers are there, domestic or recipient institutions are there. That's the one development banks. We have the domestic regulatory banks, also the CBN, like in Nigeria. We have all these banks also, that commercial banks that also give loans for climate change. So this is just a loop to actually explain the relationship between those actors. Now, again, I also have this causal loop diagram. We have a reinforcing loop twice there. All these are issues or from what I have been able to discuss in literature. And again, I actually just presented them for people to see. I've had some discussion feedback from all these people. But most importantly, this last one, I hope you can see this. This last one is what I call discussion 4, which is the one that I've been able to actually show a lot of so many variables in place. This is all still based on from literature review and all that we've got. So the only thing we can easily see from here is that let me pick R1 here, which is this reinforcing loop here. The variables involved there, as I have there, include high complexity in maintaining multiple funding sources. There will be project implementation delays leading to effectiveness of blended finance and high complexity in coordinating multiple funding sources. Now, my explanation for that loop is that the increased complexity is actually because we have so many funding sources, and this will actually lead to project implementation delays, obviously. This will reduce the overall effectiveness of blended finance, which is going to be an inefficiency, and it contributes to further complexity in structuring future finance deals. This forms a vicious cycle, perpetuating delays and inefficiency. So that's just one of those things I was able to do. So this loop here is actually one of the most important I've been able to discuss. So when it comes to feedback, please, I would want participants or just my colleagues here in the house and seniors also that have been more in the system to help me look at this very well and give me the insights I actually need here. Again, I know this is not just exhaustive because there can be some other variables I need to add. And obviously, this is just the first type from literature. So obviously, the next level is to now collect data and be able to do what I need to do next. So in conclusion, though, the significance of my project is that I want to contribute to that climate finance field, especially trying to understand intervention points of maximum influence that will provide official finance flows pathways for clean energy in Nigeria. I want to also use this to advance my knowledge of climate system-oriented stakeholder perspective, so that we can make sense of how to identify other patterns. And by using system thinking, system dynamics, these outputs will actually transform many areas of politics and practice. Challenges and ethics, it's the same thing. We have to have strategies in place for quality data. Data has always been an issue when it comes to collecting data about finance in Africa. So that again, I will make sure that I will able to fill that void by making sure that data is valid, it's also reliable. Therefore, I'm going to evaluate my second data for stability. There's a framework by funders, and also adhere to my university's research and ethics principles. And that's exactly all I need to do. These are my references for what I presented today. So thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your time. I just hope I've not taken so much of your time. Thank you so much for having me. I can take questions now. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Kehinde, for the presentation. At least I've got to learn a thing or two about blended finance. I see some applauds from Shari. Okay. Mr. Kehinde has a question. Please, the floor is yours. You have your hand raised. Yeah, you can unmute so you speak. Okay.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Mr. Kehinde, for taking on the challenge. So, looking at the topic, looking from the presentation, I'm not clear what your reference mode is. I'm not clear what your time horizon is. And then I think looking at sustainable energy generally will be too broad, because when you're talking about energy, you're actually looking at so many sectors. You're looking at the domestic sector, you're looking at the commercial sector, you're looking at the transport sector, and the transport sector is broken into four. You have the air transportation, you have the road transportation, you have the rail transportation, and then you have the marine transportation. All these use energy. So again, you have the agricultural sector. So you have so many sectors. So I think the topic looks too broad, and you could narrow it to a sector. Yeah. Then I'm not very clear whether you want to use system thinking or you are going to simulate it later, because I heard you talking about data. I don't know. I think let me stop at that.
Sorry, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, let me respond to
Okay,
that because I've written some things down. I forget. Oh, thanks so much, Mr. Ide, for your feedback. I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that I've done here, in terms of scope, I know it's a very broad project. One of the problems I'm having in terms of scope is blend finance the way it was used is actually used for cleaner projects, which is like SDG 7. So again, I've been having discussions with my supervisors in terms of how to bring it down. We've looked at all those in terms of which sectors we'll actually look at. But I think one of the sector we are looking at has to be energy in terms of renewable sources or financing renewable sources. So maybe we'll narrow it down to that. The time horizon is important because I didn't mention that, but when we know that 2015 was actually the time in the world when we had the 2030 agenda. So most of my data will be looking between 2015 and up to date in terms of blended finance itself as a topic. But in terms of data, we may need to look beyond maybe before then to have an idea of what the time we should be looking at. I think 10-year, 11-year gap is what we're looking at, or up to 2022, 23, so that we can capture the effects of COVID also. I think the last one you said is the title. Yeah, I actually agree with that. The title is broad enough because it's the working title. So I think based on what you've said, I will need to actually narrow that myself so that after picking, then I will actually narrow the title down to the factor sector that I'm looking at. Oh, the last aspect you mentioned was data simulation. Oh yes, we were trying to do that because as I said, methodology is based on collecting qualitative data first, which is what I've done from literature and also feedback from you and other things out now. The next level would be collecting quantitative data, maybe through interviews and also from interviews, collecting data and using that again as a way of simulating that model, if we actually get to that level for now.
Okay, thanks for the response. I hope that helps with some of the questions you have, Mr. Inde.
Yes. Because I'm still not clear about the time horizon, because he has talked about the historical data, but I don't know how far in the future he wants to see what is happening. And that is what we're really interested in getting feedback, because that's what will influence what policy you recommend moving forward. So we are looking from 2015 till this time, the historical data, going forward, up to where are you looking at it?
Going forward, I think one of the things we're looking at SDGs and we're looking at the 2030 target, and that target is actually very, very close. So I think I may need to look at up to 2050, which is in terms of net zero. Most countries in the world are looking at that same figures. So that to me is what I'm going to be looking at in terms of the projecting into the future, 2050, 2040.
Okay, that's all right.
Thanks for that. Shari, do you want to unmute and ask your question or make a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Kehinde, congratulations on your presentation.
Thank
I
you,
have
sir.
painstakingly listened to everything you actually mentioned, Thank you. Coming from the background of energy and climate change, I think I first of all have so I have few questions, recommendation, and
Thank you.
suggestions. Yeah, let me start with what my former colleague, my former senior said, engineer Kehinde, about reference mode that wasn't presented. I think you didn't actually conceptualize the problem. We didn't know the problem. We only saw some researches done on blended finance. So I think maybe going through the reference mode and explaining the problem, contextualizing problem to the Nigerian system, how it operates, and using some graph to explain to us would enable us to understand the problem ab initio. Yes, your first page and second page got my attention when I first checked through. On the first page, I noticed you have used some data from 2019 from IEA, and I can recall that IRENA just uploaded a new data for fossil fuel contribution as of 2023. And I think this should be updated, to get some further attention. Yep. Secondly, for the second slide, you showed some drop, some second slide, if I may guess. And please, before I move on, I think these slides need to be paged. At some points, I was confused on how far you have gone and stuff like that. It needs to be paged at least, So this graph is very beautiful. Still is actually outdated, but I would suggest this sharp downfall we have between 2005 and 2010, why have we got this, should be explained, at least, in your presentation, is actually an anomaly that will catch somebody's attention, though might not be applicable to your study, but just to be explained, so to say. Yeah. Moving on, if I may summarize the blended approach, which is alien to me, and I've learned something new, I will say thank you on this. It's kind of a financial structure that incorporates risk management, that incorporates monitoring, and also try to make have a kind of impact assessment on whatever that has been financed. It goes beyond that anyway, but this is just my few brief summary, from my own personal understanding of the concept, which is fantastic, and it is indeed integrated, and I can call it blended too. Now, where are my questions? These are my questions. When you presented your, what's it called, your causal loop, I was thinking to see a kind of system archetype. The system archetype will drive home the whole conceptual framework, because it's broad, like engineer Kehinde earlier said, it's a bit broad. The system archetype will make us see the beauty of where you are going, where you are coming from. We conceptualize the whole causal loop diagram you have earlier developed, and then we can always say, oh, this is the target. This is where the policy is likely to come from, or is likely to be impacted. So the system archetype, we have several system archetype. So yours can integrate one or two, can bring one and stuff like that. So it will encourage the listener or the whatever they call them to understand, have an idea of the whole framework moving forward. Now, in the framework, it's very elaborate, but I try to look deeply into the first and the second causal loop. I was expecting to see something, since you are dealing with finance. You have domesticated the finance, which in reality, finance in the energy space is not only domesticated. We have finance from the UN, we have finance from the World Bank. We can't achieve net zero. I wrote an article on Nigerian net zero published around March this year. we can't achieve it on our own. Even the net zero transition framework that was developed by our former Vice President, Professor Yomi Osinbajo, released August 2021 or 2022, is open sum of $1 billion was required, and we can't single-handedly approach it. So domesticating it alone might not yield sustainable results, but instead, why not try to look into foreign aid, which at the end of the day will lead to what is called parallel systems. You know, foreign aid and domestic aid would conflict at some point, leading to what is called a parallel system. And how do we move forward, moving on with that two concepts, combining it with the beautiful causal loop you've earlier developed and the rest. And from this causal loop, the little I could achieve from there is that I noticed they are all reinforcing. Does it mean they will continue growing without something impeding the growth? This is what parallel system will achieve. Definitely there will be an impedance to the growth. So if you look at it in this direction of considering such finance from the perspective of domestic finance, foreign finance, or whatever you call external aid, or whatever we call it, bringing out some loopholes that we want to address that at the end of the day we achieve sustainability. Definitely we know foreign finance, we have a time frame. Then you can build up, okay, if this time frame elapses, how do we continue financing on our own? Like in the health sector, we have USAID and the rest that elapse every 8 years or thereabouts. So how do we continue financing using domestic approach to achieve a blended system that will be that we assess a risk methodology, monitoring, and then ILE impacted system. Now, the impact aspect should consider how many people at the end of the day were able to either electrified. In short, how many people were able to solve the problem you earlier identified from your reference mode was able to impact. I don't know if you're dealing with electrification, if you're dealing with government coffers being able or buoyant enough to finance it, depend on the reference mode. So this will now answer the question back to your reference mode. Then from there, you can build up several leverage points to now see what can be tweaked, what can be managed in the system to make sure we achieve a goal being set out earlier in the reference mode. So at this point, thank you so much, Mr. Kehinde. You have really reached a milestone in your PhD dissertation, and I say congratulations on this behalf. Thank you. Yep.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry. Oh, thanks for that elaborate feedback. I really thank you. Thanks. I was just writing away. Oh, I think I'm going to start. I think most of the things you said are actually like kind of advice in terms of what we can do better, which has been taken down. I think in terms of the reference mode, I'm going to talk about that, or maybe later I will look at that and talk about the game. One aspect of this theory that I didn't mention a lot was in terms of the dated. When I was mentioning this graph, I actually mentioned that they were dated, especially this one. So obviously, I'm going to change this one. At the beginning, I actually said the reason, because I started this project many years ago, it was actually abandoned for some time for personal reasons. Then I pick it up now. So when we wanted to do the deep mind meld, I just asked myself, what can I do? So this is what I used to get my second approval to move on. So obviously there was no time for me to actually do all those difficult jobs of doing that. So I'm really sorry for that. So next time I will not present things that this dated. So please apologies on that. In terms of what you said, the parallel system, foreign aid and domestic aid, you made a very good aspect. The project itself will be looking at the two of them, which is the foreign and the domestic. Is a very good point that you mentioned. We have the foreign finance, we also have the domestic, the external and also the internal. The internal part of what I want to look at is based on what you said, that okay, the external actors can come in at a time, then internal actors can come in. And you're actually right, because this is actually the effect of, that is actually the way blended finance should work. In terms of projects, I think I have something like that should be here that I didn't mention enough. But there was a particular, I think the slide was taken off. So there was a particular slide I had that actually showed projects in terms of the early stage projects, or the middle stage, and also towards the end. And again, as you said, one of the things we should be looking at for is where do we actually need these aids to come in. Again, it will be in form of finance. Then after 8 years, as you said, then we can now take over. So again, it's something I'm going to look at in terms of your advice there on that. I'm ready to take that on board. The theory of change for this project really is looking at the end of the day, the impact, which has to be electrifying, because again, we know the figures for electricity consumption in Nigeria, which is very poor. So again, I didn't articulate that enough also. What I'm going to do, based on what Mr. Babajide also said, Mr. Kehinde said earlier, was that in my theory of change, I need to narrow it down in terms of picking a particular sector, which most likely has to be electrification. And maybe with that reference mode on that, then I will not be able to make it work better. You gave me so much advice in terms of my coastal loop diagram. Again, the slides not reached is actually, again, an error. So I'm really sorry for that too. The archetypes here, you mentioned system archetypes. So when I was looking at it, limit to growth was one of the first archetypes that came to my mind. But again, I changed my mind in terms of actually using a very good archetype that will capture what I'm trying to achieve, again, based on my philosophy. So all I need to do is that you've given me a very good opportunity now to go back to my drawing board and actually pick one or two archetypes to actually be able to articulate what's actually happening in that particular system. Thanks so much again, Mr. Tari, for your words of wisdom and advice. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir. You're welcome.
Awesome.
Yep.
Very helpful feedback. I don't know if there's any other feedback from any person else, but I just wanted to add. Okay. Mr. Kehinde, do you want to say something?
Yes. Mr. Shari raised a very vital point, and I think I need to just add a little thing to it. So the reference mode needs to be made clear. So what he called system archetype is the dynamic hypothesis, which usually is expressed in causal loop diagram. So these two things have to be made extremely clear. In fact, for people who have looked at best practices in system dynamics, they agreed on these two. You understand? They are unable to agree on, and there was a meeting of past president, award winners, and they're trying to come up with what they agree as best practice. Two things they agreed on that must be seen in a system dynamic problem is reference mode, as well as the what Shari raised, which is he called it archetype, but it's dynamic hypothesis. It must be seen clearly. Thank you.
Right, very helpful. So just to add, my feedback would be you need to maybe have one slide that talks about the SD process. So when you have a slide that shows maybe a flow or some sort of like a diagramming of where you are in the process, that should help. And the other part would be, I know that there are tons of research that have been done in this area. So I don't know how many of the system dynamics related work you've cited or you're looking at when it comes to like developing your causal loop diagram or your stock and flow diagram. And so that also should provide some insights as to how you can narrow down the scope of the work, and then also to address some of the limitations you talked about. Then something related to what Mr. Kehinde said earlier on was like the outcome or output of this work. Like if you're going to have like a simulation at the end of the day, usually one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure that whatever research we do goes beyond the paper or publication. So even if it's to have like some simulation that you could use for your own engagement, you could share, you could host, stakeholders can play and interact with, and then that goes back to like why there needs to be like a reference mode. So you have like your hopes and your fear, like in this current reference mode, this is what it looks like. If it's like over time, maybe the I don't know, the heating level in terms of what the climate change or what's it called temperature is, or the cost of the impact in terms of like negative impact in terms of what's happening with climate change over time. And then when people pull some levers, they see, okay, based on these policies, so I know that's part of your recommendation, if we implement these policies. So some tool that can keep people engaged and help them understand the impact of what you've done and what they are also doing as well. Then the other thing would be like, one of the reasons why these opportunities provided is so that we can continue to have discussions. So we're looking forward to like, some improvements, like you've done this part. So what will you do next based on this feedback or based on the other things that you're doing behind the scenes? So that's like, we're looking forward to you maybe having a part 2 of this with some of the comments that have been provided. But all this was like a very good presentation. At least I've learned something. Blended finance. I can tell people that I know what blended finance is. At least something to share. All right, thanks. Kehinde, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Kelechi. Based on what you said, something else came to my mind, because I was part of what's his name, Andrew Jones. What do you call it? This thing that he has, this program that he has.
The Climate Interactive.
Climate Interactive.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Climate Interactive. So we broke into what do you call it? We broke into, is it what do you call it?
Groups, yeah. Like the
yeah.
The
we broke into groups, and I fell into the group of those that represented the developing nation. So I think one of the things you should anticipate is that we are not industrialized. And the problem, the challenge we are bound to face is that our country, if you're looking at Nigeria, is what will be the effect as per the activities of other nations. We are not industrialized. So as a matter of fact, two major, the West and America are the greatest contributors to these climate issues. India, China are just coming into it. The worst culprit in climate issue is USA and the West. So, and moving forward, there's nothing that we have done that suggests that we are going to contribute significantly to climate issues. So what do we do to ensure that our country is not turned, or developing nations are not turned into dumping ground? You understand? Or it's not being exploited. How do we react? There's nothing that we have done to suggest that we're about to be industrialized.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to add to what you're saying before I think Shari goes, is the fact that I know in one of your slides, you said something about, I think Africa would be the continent that would most likely be the most affected by climate change based on the heat map. And that's sad. That feels like this is not fair. Like, why do we have to be the ones to bear the brunt of what's happening in other parts of the globe? But anyways, let's see what happens. Shari, do you want to go?
Yeah, actually, initially raising up for hand was a mistake, but
Okay.
let me blend what my senior colleagues have earlier mentioned. Yes, why will Africa bear the brunt? From my experience of climate change studies, Sub-Saharan Africa will bear the brunt based on our geological location. If you look at some physical attributes of easterly winds, the monsoon and the rest, they all connive in the central. This is just physical attributes of the circumstance. So looking at from that perspective, we bear the brunt, fine. Secondly, our own infrastructural development is weak, which makes our adaptability and resilience capacity weak. So these two married together makes us much more vulnerable as a region. Now, going to Mr. Ayinde, Engineer Ayinde's point, yes, Africa does not emit. Definitely, we know that. What climate change issues and climate adaptation strategy or mitigation strategy will do for us is this. We are far behind in electrification. Definitely, going renewable wise with good market strategy, renewable energy market strategy would enable areas that are yet to be electrified, coupled with financial strategy, maybe blended analysis of the rest, would enable us achieve high electrification rates, and maybe Sustainable Development Goal 7 will be achieved in no time. Fine, I'm of the school of thought that none of the Western or China or Asian countries develop based on use of renewable energy to drive their high energy consuming industries. But definitely, if we must reach the first, second, third tier of World Bank assessment of electrification, then one of the favorable way to go is renewable. And I'm sure Africa will not be a dumping ground with the appropriate policy in place, like such studies. So thank you so much on that.
Thank you. Yeah, just one feedback for you, Mr. Kehinde, is to maybe look for Sharia after this call. I think it has a lot of insights. We are still like playing around with the tool, but there's some domain knowledge or expertise is going to go a long way. Yeah, I don't know if you have something to say.
I just have to say thank you to Mr. Sharia and Mr. Ide. When I saw the low turnout, that was actually because again, most of my colleagues in GCA did not even attend, so I don't know if they are here though. But at least I have actually got a very, again, 7 o'clock and we're still here. So I'm really thanking the two of them for what they have said.
Yeah.
I actually thank Mr. Inde for the latest one in terms of when I mentioned this, I was always looking at the geological position of Nigeria. Again, is actually elaborate on the monsoon and everything I wrote it down. Infrastructure is also very weak. I mentioned that when I started, I was thinking of talking about the infrastructure for Nigeria again, which is not. But I think the key points I've taken from all these bodies that this is a doable PhD project. This is a contemporary project that I can actually look into. All I just need to do is to track. And based on what you said, Kleshi, all I need to do is now come back again and give you the feedback so that you can know that this person is not just coming here for commentary. I've taken board on this and I'm actually ready to come back. I love feedback. That is where I was brought up. And again, this is a very good, conducive environment for me to receive those constructive feedback. So obviously, I just have to come back. But I'm just going to allow you that. Don't make me come back in the next 2 weeks, though.
Take your time. It takes time to get work like this done, especially with the scope. I think when you narrow down the scope, so because you can't address all of the issues that we've talked, the whole sustainable thing and finance, it's a lot. So just to stay within what you can do. But all the same, this is fine, very helpful, good meeting. I don't know if there's any other person that would have some time later on to present some work, but that's what this platform is for. I really appreciate you for presenting, Mr. Kehinde, and we look forward to some feedback. Please, let's continue having a conversation on the WhatsApp group. If you have more comments or feedback for Mr. Kehinde, you can share that on the platform. Once we're done, this recording will be up if you have any need to refer back to the presentation. All right. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate your presence, please.